Okay, so we have two fractions that we are multiplying. Remember, when you multiply fractions, it's straight across, top times top, bottom times bottom. But before you do anything, the very first thing you should do is go through each piece of the problem for the first fraction, numerator and denominator, second fraction, numerator and denominator. We want to factor anything that can be factored, okay? So if we're going to start with that first fraction, 4x plus 5 at the top, can we do anything with that? Does it have a GCF? Are they perfect squares or cubes that we can do? Okay, so that's going to stay the same. And then we're going to look at the denominator, the x minus 2. Can that one factor at all? Then look at the second fraction, 3x plus 4. Do I have a GCF or can I factor that? And then the denominator is 4x plus 5, which we already said we can't factor, right? So then what I'm looking for is, what do I have that's exactly the same at the top and the bottom? It can either be in the same fraction or opposite fractions. What is it that you guys see that's the same? The 4x plus 5. So we can cancel out the entire 4x plus 5 at the top of the first fraction with the entire 4x plus 5 at the bottom of the second fraction. Okay, it can be in the same fraction or different fractions as long as one is at the top and one is at the bottom. And we're canceling the entire binomial. And then what we do is we just multiply what's left. In that first fraction at the top, if I canceled everything out, what's there? There's just a 1 left, right? So if I multiply at the top, 1 times 3x plus 4 is just going to be 3x plus 4. If you wanted to put it in parentheses and put a 1 in front of it, you can, but you don't have to. And then at the bottom, I have x minus 2 in the first fraction, and I have a 1 in the second fraction, so what's left in the bottom there? Just the x minus 2. And then can anything else simplify? No. Some people might start looking at the 4 and the 2 and saying I can reduce those, but the 4 is attached to that 3x with that plus sign, and that 2 is attached to the x, so therefore we cannot simplify those, and we would leave our answer just like that. We got rid of what was the same at the top and the bottom, and then we multiply whatever is left. So if I take a look at number 2, this one's got a little bit more involved in it. In the numerator of the first fraction, I have 4 times x minus 2 times x plus 5. And then in the denominator, bless you, I have 8x. And then in the numerator of the second fraction, I have 16x. And then in the denominator, I have x plus 5 and x minus 5. Looking at both fractions, bless you, does it look like there is anything that we can factor? Or is it already factored for us? It's already factored? Right. So what I would recommend is looking at any binomials that are exactly the same, one at the top, one at the bottom, and going ahead and let's get rid of those. What do you notice is the same? X plus 5. Okay, so I'm going to cancel the two x plus 5s. And I'm going to multiply everything that's left. At the top of the first fraction, I have this 4 and the x minus 2. And at the top of the second fraction, I have 16x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply those. Now, I'm not actually going to distribute inside the parentheses, but what I will do is go ahead and multiply that 4 and that 16x. 4 times 16 is 64. And then I'm just going to leave the parentheses, because if I distribute, I would maybe have to go back and refactor to see if I can simplify any further. So I'm going to leave it just like that. And then at the bottom, what do you notice we have still? We have the 8x and the x minus 5. Is everybody okay with that? Okay, but we have to check and see if we can still simplify. And remember, we simplify factors, things that are being multiplied, not things that are being added and subtracted. If you look in front of the parentheses at the top and the bottom, they both have a number and a variable, correct? So let's start with the numbers. Do 64 and 8 have anything in common that I can simplify? Yeah, I can divide them both by 8. So that's going to turn to an 8 at the top. That will turn to a 1 at the bottom. And then I have those x's that are still in front of the parentheses. They are being multiplied. It is x to the first and an x to the first. So what are they going to do to each other? Cancel completely. And then I have in parentheses the x minus 2 and the x minus 5, which are not the same, so we cannot simplify those. Is there anything else that it looks like we can simplify? No. So we can leave our answer like that, or because the denominator has that 1 in the front, you could also just leave it as x minus 5. Okay. I would not distribute that 8. Again, you're creating more work that you don't really need to do. You can leave it just in the front. You can distribute it to do 8x minus 16, but there's no need to. Anybody have any questions? All right, take a minute and write down number 3. We'll work through this one together. Again, the very first thing we want to do is we want to go through each fraction and factor anything and everything that can be factored. So if we start at the top of the first fraction, I have 5x minus 5. Can that be factored? What can I pull out? A 5. They both have a 5, so I'm going to pull that out. So I'm going to put the 5, and then in parentheses, what would be left? X minus 1. Okay. Now what about that denominator, 10x? Can that factor? It's just one term, right? Can't really factor. We're just going to leave it alone for now. It can simplify, but we're not at that point yet. We're still just trying to factor. All right, what about the top of the second fraction? I've got x squared plus x. Can that factor? We have a GCF of x, so we're going to pull that out. And we're left with x plus what? 1. And then that denominator, x squared minus 1. They do not have a GCF, but they are both perfect squares. And we can factor them because they are being subtracted. So I'm going to set up my 2 parentheses. The square root of x squared is x. That goes in the front. The square root of 1 is 1. That goes in the back. And then we do 1 of each sign. And now that you have everything factored, what we need to do is go through and get rid of, I'm going to start with the binomials. Okay, what do we see that's exactly the same? It can either be in the same fraction or opposite fractions as long as one is at the top and one is at the bottom. I can cancel out the x plus 1s. Anything else? X minus 1. Then once I've gotten rid of all of my binomials, I'm going to multiply what's left. Just be careful that you don't lose anything. Sometimes when you start marking things out, you just lose sight of a piece of it. So in the first fraction, I have a 5 that I'm going to multiply by the x that I have in the second fraction. And then for the denominator, I have 10x in the first, but everything canceled in the second. So that's just going to be 10x. And then we can go and continue to simplify. Look at your numbers. 5 and 10, what can they both divide by? 5. So that's going to turn to a 1 and a 2. And then what are those x's going to do to each other? Cancel. So my answer is just 1/2.
Divide by 5x.
It would still be, because the 5x at the top would disappear, so you would still have to put that 1 up there. It would still be 1/2. Does that make sense? Because it's if the numerator disappears, you have to put something up there. Yeah. Right. Everybody okay with that? All right, I want y'all to try 4. Yeah. What is it that they both have in common? A 4 and an x, right? So we're going to take and we're going to pull out that 4x. We don't just lose it. Yes, we're dividing everything by that, but we still have to keep it as part of our problem. And if I divide each one of those by 4x, what am I left with? X minus 8, okay. What about that denominator? Does that factor at all? No, it's just x. Okay. Numerator of the second fraction, x squared plus 3x. Again, we start with a GCF. Do they have anything in common? They have an x, so we're going to pull that out. And what would be left? And then the denominator, x squared minus 5x minus 24. Again, we're looking for a GCF first. They don't all three have anything in common. And because it's three terms, then we just do where we look at the last term. We want numbers that multiply to give us 24, that subtract to give us 5. What numbers multiply to give me 24 and subtract to give me 5? 3 and 8. Okay, remember this means my signs are different. That one goes in front of the bigger number, so it's going to be a minus 8 and a plus 3. Everybody okay with that part? All right, let's start getting rid of what's the same. What's the first thing you see? And then x minus 8, right? I marked out the wrong one first. Then we're going to multiply. 4x times x gives me 4x squared. And in the bottom, the only thing I have left is that x. And then I need to simplify. This time, I do not have any numerical values that will reduce with that 4, but I do have 2 x's at the top and 1 at the bottom, so it's just going to end up being 4x. You can put it over 1 if you want, or you can also just write 4x. There's 1 extra x at the top, so that extra x stays at the top. And the hardest part about this is the factoring. If you're not good at it, that's where we're going to struggle. Everything else is just getting rid of and then continuing to simplify. Actually, go ahead and try both of those. All right, let's start with 5. Numerator of the first fraction, y plus 3. Does that have a GCF or can it be factored? In the denominator of that fraction, 3y plus 9, what can I do there? Pull out a 3. All right, and then the second fraction, I have trinomials, no GCF at the top. I want numbers that multiply to give me 25 and add to give me 10. What are they? And then my signs are going to be the same, and they're both going to be minus. And then the same thing in the denominator, a trinomial, no GCF. I want numbers that multiply to give me 40 and subtract to give me 3. What numbers multiply to give me 40 and subtract to give me 3? This means my signs are different. That one goes in front of the bigger number, so it's a plus 8 and a minus 5. Now everything is factored. Let's get rid of everything that we see is exactly the same. 1 at the top, 1 at the bottom. It can be in the same fraction. It can be in different fractions. What's the first thing you see? Y minus 5. Okay, what else? The y plus 3. Anything else? All right, at the top, the only thing I have left is this y minus 5. So I'm going to bring that down. And at the bottom, I have that 3. Don't lose that. And the y plus 8. So I'm just going to put it as 3 times y plus 8. I do not need to distribute the 3. Is there anything else that is the same that I can simplify? No. So we leave our answer just like that. If you wanted to at the top, you could put a 1 and then parentheses y minus 5, but because it's a 1, it's not necessary. Is everybody okay with that one? All right, let's start with 6. At the top, 7a squared plus 21a. What can I pull out? 7a, okay. And then I'd be left with a plus 3. In the denominator, that 14 is in front of the parentheses, but inside that parentheses, I have a squared minus 9. Both perfect squares being subtracted, so that can actually continue to factor. Square root of a squared is a. Square root of 9 is 3. 1 plus, 1 minus. What about that second fraction? Is there anything I can factor, top or bottom? Okay, so I'm just going to bring that down. And let's get rid of what's the same. A plus 3. 1 at the top, 1 at the bottom. At the top, I have this 7a that I want to multiply by that. So we're going to leave it as 7a and then just parentheses a plus 3. I don't actually want to distribute because I might still be able to simplify. Oops. I lost the 7 there, sorry. And then at the bottom, I have 14 times a minus 3 times 7. So we're going to do the 14 times 7. Was that 98? And then we're going to keep that a minus 3 in parentheses. And I know some of y'all might have done it just a little bit differently here, and that's fine. Starting at the top, we have the numbers in the front, the 7 and the 98. Those can both divide by 7. So that's just going to be a and a plus 3, because there's a 1 in front of that. What's 98 divided by 7? 14. And then a minus 3. And I'm going to write it like this too. Can I get rid of the a plus 3 and the a minus 3? No. Okay, you can either leave your answer like that or like that. But because it's not exactly the same, the a plus 3 and the a minus 3, those are not the same, so we cannot get rid of those. Some people may have from, hold on, this point right here, where I just highlighted, some people may have seen that there was a 7 at the top of the first fraction and a 7 at the bottom and just canceled those out before multiplying. That is okay. But I like to just get rid of binomials, multiply, and simplify it. I'm not telling you you have to do it that way. It's just when we start crossing out a lot of things, people get lost, and so it just gets some confusing sometimes. Anybody have any questions? Do we feel like we need more, or it's just the factoring we got to struggle with a little bit? Everybody good?